Now, with the events that we are discussing here, the inevitable result will be the U.S. takeover of Hawaii by the United States, whereby the cumulative effect of what we're discussing is, of course, the annexation of Hawaii as official territory of the United States. And the beginning of this takeover, which we'll discuss very soon, it happens by the 1880s. But there are two key events here that will basically transform Hawaii and make it even more vulnerable to Western influence and, of course, American takeover. And that's the Great Mahele of 1848 and a treaty, the Reciprocity Treaty of 1875. So let's first discuss the Great Mahele. And this is one of the most consequential events and transformations that occurred in that 1848, as mentioned. Okay, this happened under the King Kamehameha III, and basically the Mahele reorganized land ownership in Hawaii. Let's remember that before this time, it was under a feudal-based system whereby even commoners could sustain their livelihoods by, use of the land. There was nothing controversial about it. There's no such thing as quote-unquote private property, as we discussed. But what the Great Mahele did, as mentioned here in the slide, is it created this concept of private property imposed upon the Hawaiian Islands. So, again, the Mahele reorganized land ownership. They did this by dividing land among four groups of people in Hawaii. The crown, the king, right? Then the chiefs, the ali'i. And then there's the government. And then fourth, and this would happen eventually, the commoners and even foreigners, okay? Commoners and even foreigners were allowed to claim parcels of the land. So the Great Mahele now is leading to land being recast, as I mentioned, as private property. Land is commodified. It has a price tag on it, right? And again, natives had no concept to this before this period. Just like Native Americans on the U.S. continent had no concept of private property, they argue that land is available to all, just like the air you breathe. How could you own the air you breathe, right? That same concept applied to land. How could you own the land to claim it as yours? But nonetheless, this is what's happening. Land is commodified. You could buy it, you could sell it, you could put a price tag on it, and what have you. Today we use the word real estate, right? Now, on the face of it, this event seemed to be progressive, so to speak, seemed to be a civilizing measure. And moreover, this move by the Hawaii government, by the king, right? King Kamehameha III, it was defensive, right? It was meant, it was hoped that through the formalization of these land titles to the king, to the chiefs, to the government, and even the commoners, through formalizing these land titles using Western legal standards, it was hoped that that would protect Hawaiian sovereignty against foreign encroachment. Okay, but the outcome was, in fact, paradoxical. Many commoners, when they were finally, allowed to claim parcels of land, many of the commoners lacked the resources or lacked the legal knowledge to secure their claims. Okay, they were unable to take advantage of it. At the same time, foreigners were permitted to purchase land outright. Okay, so the results of the Mahele were devastating. Okay, now again, although commoners were theoretically entitled to the land, fewer than 30,000 acres and 30,000 acres out of roughly 4 million in all the islands, right? Fewer than 30,000 acres out of that 4 million ended up in the commoners' hands. And eventually, as you can imagine, most of it would end up in foreigners' hands. Okay, now, again, Western norms of land ownership were imposed upon the commoners, right? And it was expected that the commoners, undertake things like surveying the land, that they officially file and provide legal documents. They had to pay fees. Yet many native Hawaiians, of course, we're talking about the commoners here, were unaware of this process. And still, others could not even afford to survey the lands because it involved fees. Many could not afford to pay the taxes to claim the parcels of land. Okay? And still, to add to that, others were displaced even before the claims could be filed. So, again, the cumulative result of this is that a few decades after 1848, with this Great Mahele underway, Native Hawaiians controlled less than 1% of their ancestral homelands. Okay, think about that, right? This is their ancestral homeland, their ancestral land. Once you commodified it and put up legal norms and standards, within a few decades, certainly by the turn of the 20th century, it ended up that Native Hawaiians, especially the commoners, controlled less than 1% of ancestral lands. At the same time, foreigners and, the elites, especially the businessmen, right, plantation owners, acquired these vast estates. So again, with land becoming a commodity to be bought, to be sold, even to be mortgaged, right, this had devastating effects upon the native Hawaiians. And let's remember, you add that together with the fact that there was demographic catastrophe that occurred with the influx of, deadly microbes and pathogens, whereby the natives had no immunological resistance towards, leading to, this devastating impact demographically. All right, so long story short, over the following decades, increasing amounts of the land, arable land, the best lands, passed into the hands of American and European settlers. Okay, why is this so crucial to understand? Well, the answer to that is this. It'll be the importance of this indigenous land for sugar agribusiness. Okay, the sugar industry, and we know how sugar is a very popular commodity, right? Among even today, right? We like many of our foods sweetened, and you could only imagine back then this was a highly in demand commodity throughout the world, especially in Europe and Western civilization. But in many of those countries, including the United States, right, not to mention Europe, the climate and the soil was not conducive to sugar cultivation. That could happen in the tropics, right, in the Caribbean, in Hawaii, all right. Okay, so let's recall that westward expansion is a commercial venture. Okay, this is going back a few weeks. We recast westward expansion as commercial expansion, right? Even geographically. And needs to say this applies to the American sugar interest in Hawaii. So by the mid-1800s, the mid-19th century, sugar cultivation emerged as the economic engine of the Kingdom of Hawaii, due to global demand, as I just explained, right? In fact, the global demand by the 1800s was rising. And I also said this, Hawaii's climate being tropical, proved to be ideal for its production. However, at this time, it's important to note this, and this is going to lead to the Reciprocity Treaty of 1875. Access to the American market, to American consumers, was limited by U.S. tariffs. And what are tariffs? You probably heard that word recently. Well, tariffs are taxes, basically levied upon imports. And the intention of tariffs is to protect the domestic economy from foreign imports, from foreign competition, economically speaking. Now, by the time the Hawaii sugar production is, starting to gain traction here on the global market, they found themselves disadvantaged compared to, especially competition in the Caribbean, right? Sugar exports to the United States in the Caribbean, like Cuba and so forth. Okay, so as American planters in Hawaii gained control of the plantations and the mills that, let's remember, was enabled through the Great Mahele, well, they pressed for closer economic ties with the U.S. And again, I have to remind you that many of them are American in Hawaii, right? Not all of them, but many of them are American. And also, they're the descendants of the missionaries that we discussed. So more and more you see capital investment, you see the shipping networks in the Pacific, and credit increasingly flowing from American sources to Hawaii. And this means, or it meant, that Hawaii's economy becomes structurally tied to American markets. Okay. Now, let's not forget, through these developments, the Kingdom of Hawaii remained an internationally recognized country, right? A sovereign state. It secured diplomatic recognition among major empires, as well, of course, as the United States. Had a written constitution, had a modern legal system. Now it had a, quote, modern way of looking at the land, right, through the Great Mahele. But we have to remember that this is happening concurrent with U.S. westward expansion, reaching completion in the continental U.S. As I mentioned a while back, 1890 would be the year where the U.S. government announced that the frontier no longer remained, because we had spread U.S. civilization from East Coast to West Coast. So, as you can imagine, this intensified interest in Pacific trade, because as I mentioned, westward movement does not stop once we reach the shores of the Pacific in 1890. So as you might expect, many American visionaries of empire at this time realized that Hawaii had this geostrategic importance, since it was located between, let's say, the West Coast, California especially, and Asia itself. So this made Hawaii, as a potential territory, well, let's just say it made it highly coveted by these American planners and visionaries. And the United States was already attuned to the interest of American sugar plantation owners in the islands of Hawaii. All right, let's remember they're American, right? So it doesn't surprise us that this link exists here. So you could see how economics and even imperial strategy is connecting here. And the result will be, of course, as I just discussed earlier, the overthrow of the monarch in Hawaii and the formal annexation of Hawaii as a territory of the U.S. and, of course, eventual state. So the next video will discuss the Reciprocity Treaty.